But yeah, super excited for today's session and to hear Alex's story. It is a pretty interesting story, and I'm sure you guys all can relate to it. A little bit about me. My name is Navi, and I'm one of the co-founders here at Mintbean. Um, for those of you that are familiar with what we do and the learnathons that we have weekly, I'm sure you guys already know how fantastic of a learning ground they are. For those of you that have never heard of the learnathons, a quick intro is we present a new prompt every single week. We identified that the market needed more places to really learn by doing rather than just looking at tutorials and watching videos and not practicing good coding habits. So this is why we created this community. We've been running this community for about a year. There's a lot of developers that we've helped either hire internally for our team, about 10 of them, and we've helped hundreds of other developers connect with employers who were having trouble connecting with employers for like a year. We recently launched the Dev Collective, and we're super excited to make it more easier for junior developers to land their first job. And I can get into that on Friday in our learnathons, but I did want to do a little bit of an intro on that. Enough about that. Over to our guest today, Alex. I'm super excited. Before we start, I'd love to maybe just ask you a few questions in terms of tell us what you're currently working on. I think that's a great launch pad.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey everyone, I'm Alex. I'm the head of engineering at Lupin, which is kind of like, it's a new startup. The idea is basically giving a way for employees to engage with their employers in a way where you can kind of see what everyone's doing in a remote world. Like, COVID's changed everything. It's changed how we interact with our bosses, and it's changed also all the subtle nuances we used to have, having lunch with our, employers. And it's basically a new way to deal with that in like a remote first world. Like, how do you know how your people are doing when you don't see them every day?
Yeah. I think it's easier for that's so interesting. I feel like for our company, we're about 8 people. I think for smaller teams, it's definitely easier to navigate like how your team is doing. But as you grow and scale, I've seen companies that my friends work for where it's like thousands of people, especially in the remote world. It's gotten more challenging to know like what everyone's up to and how do you collaborate with not necessarily your own team but other team members who are external, like who are in a different department. So yeah, I think Lupin's doing a fantastic job. Usually at this point, I always ask our guests to share like their journey, but this talk is really about your journey. So I'm going to pass it over to you, and yeah, we'll get started. So I'm just gonna mute myself, and I'll be over in chat, making sure that everything is good. Just let me know if there's anything you need from me.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so this talk is just why founders aren't hiring you, or to be like a bit nicer, like what I learned trying to be an employee, when trying to get my first job in tech, and like what I wish somebody had told me. So today I want to just go over 3 main ideas. And before I do that, I just want to do a bit more about me. So I don't come from a tech background. About 8 years ago, I just finished a degree in economics. I managed to wrangle a job in this startup, like straight after university. Didn't really know what I was doing, and I was wearing a lot of different hats. I was doing a bit of marketing, I was doing a bit of web design. I was really just doing anything to, keep getting employed in this job. And the thing that I liked most out of all those hats was basically just having ideas. We were a really small team, and the CEO was really open to other people contributing, like, what should we do next? And so I'd like have ideas, and I was like really trying to find, what's the next big product we could do. And they had a dev team, and we'd work together. And so how it would work is I'd have an idea, and then the dev team would implement it. And we did this for about a year, and we had some really good results. We had a couple of products making, 100K a year. And so I kind of went to my boss, like feeling pretty proud of myself. Like, asking for a raise. Because at the time I was like I was like the lowest paid in the company. And I'd kind of talked to some of the software engineers, and I knew they were all getting paid like roughly double or triple what I was getting paid. So I went to my boss and was like, hey, like I've done these products. And he kind of, sat me down and was like, whoa, Alex, you're having the ideas, they're implementing the ideas. We can literally not hire them any cheaper than they're being paid now. And so it was literally, it was a bit of an eye opener. The difference between someone who has ideas and the difference between someone who makes ideas is like literally about 100K in salary. So the next day I quit. And I decided I was either going to learn to code or I was going to be homeless. So I quit my job. I had about 100 quid in the bank, and I just bought a load of tins of food. So I went to like, I guess you guys have Walmart, but we had like Lidl. So I went to Lidl. I bought about £100 worth of tins in my cupboard, got like an extended overdraft so I could pay rent for about 6 months. And I just started trying to sell web design, which is something I didn't know, but I did know enough about design to know that I could learn it. And that really like lit a fire under me. And that basically started my journey. For the next 5 years, I was full-time web designer. And then I got my first job in software engineering about 3 or 4 years ago. And then from there, iterated through a couple of startups until finally at Lupin, where I'm like leading the team. So to go to the first thing I wish I'd done is focus. Tech is insane right now. Like you go to it and you're like, okay, I'm going to learn to code. So you learn a bit of Ruby, and then someone's like, hey, do you know Rails? Like if you want to do a web app, you need to know Rails. So then you start learning Rails, and then people are like, oh no, wait, you need to know React, because like React's like the new framework. So like your Rails app, it's going to talk to this React app. I think all of this is distraction. Like when you're starting out, what you should do is just focus. Choose like one technology. Like if I was you today, all I'd learn is React. I wouldn't even start with JavaScript. I'd just go straight to React with CSS and try and build something. Like just try and build anything. And when you like hit your first problem, like I don't know what JavaScript is, then I'd go and learn JavaScript. I'd just try and build something straight away. And I think just doing that, just focusing, you're going to get so far ahead of everyone else who's trying to learn Vue, learn React, learn Svelte, like learn all of these different technologies right at the same time. And all they have to show for it is a portfolio filled of like to-do apps, from reading documentation. You're going to get a lot further just focusing on one piece of technology and just try and build interesting things and try and build beautiful things. Because when an employer like looks at your portfolio, they're looking at two things. They're looking at code quality. And so like putting some bit of effort into that and like making sure you're not like leaving comments in is helpful, but also just like they want to look at something. Like if you have a portfolio of 10 apps and they're all like have great design, you're just going to stand out. And so that would be my first point. Don't try everything, focus. My second point, opportunity, not money. So after I did my web design, I decided like, okay, I know enough now that I could try and get my first job in software engineering. And I was living in Birmingham at the time because my girlfriend had like a really good job there. And for people who don't know the UK, Birmingham's a bit of a dive. It's kind of like, it's this massive city in the UK, but there is no tech jobs there. This is not a place you go to build a great startup. So I decided, right, I'm just going to commute to London every day. And I did that for 2 years. So London to Birmingham is about 2 hours there, 2 hours back. And that's when the trains run on time, which they don't. So I did that because London has two things that Birmingham didn't have. It had opportunity. There was so many more jobs in London than there were in Birmingham. And it wasn't just that there was more jobs, so like I had a better chance of getting one. It was that those jobs were better jobs. Not in terms of money, the pay was awful. What was better was that they were using technologies that 5 years from now, I'd still be using. Like everything I learned, the company I work for was called Huckletree. Everything I used there, I'm still using today. And so I think the benefit of that compared to like the jobs in Birmingham were using technologies like PHP and .NET and things that are like still in use, but have like much smaller scope of jobs. I think the benefit of doing that, going to London, making no money, but like playing with the latest technologies, seeing how like startups, like real startups were working, has like fed massively into the like small amount of success that I've had so far. And so that's what I'd say to you is go find the opportunities, like go find, and especially in the time of COVID, there's never been a better time to go find a startup that you think that you probably shouldn't be able to work at and go and try and work at it. You know, forget about money for like the first 2 years of being a software engineer, because the money's going to come, right? There's no, you know, software engineer with 10 years of experience who's not making good money. Focus on the opportunity and the money's going to come. The third and final point, under promise, over deliver. So when I think, so like usually in tech interviews, how it works is you have face-to-face, and you should all be great at that, especially if you come from like a non-tech background. Just by being human, you've got like a leg above any other developer, just because you can talk to them like a normal human being. And usually the person making the choices, there's two people. There's like a HR manager, and then there's like the tech lead. So you've already won over the HR manager just by being like a regular human. To the second point, how are you going to win over the tech recruiter or the tech like CTO is by like having either a good portfolio or doing like some kind of technical coding test. And if they give you the option, and usually companies do now, they'll give you the option between like some kind of time test or like a take-home project. Choose the take-home project, because then you can actually put effort and time into it rather than like try and answer like a load of, to be honest, bullshit questions about what JavaScript is, what a string is, you know, or like questions that are designed to trip you up. Take a project, and then whatever they ask you to do, over deliver. So for example, a friend of mine that I work with, when we asked him to build an API for a backend role, one of the things he did, which we loved, was that he built the API, but he also built a front end that would communicate with that API. And he also like commented his code. He wrote a README for his repos. Things like that, like little touches, like a README takes what, 2 minutes to write? But that little touch, it looks massive compared when you're like comparing it to somebody else who did the absolute bare minimum of an API, yeah, but no README, no understanding of like how to set it up. There's like little things like that that you can do that will like help massively in getting that job. Always try and over deliver. And if it's like a front end job, like spend just like an hour or two just doing the CSS of it. I've gotten a few jobs just by like spending a bit of time on how the design should look, even though that wasn't one of the requirements, because people like beautiful things. And so if you just build beautiful things, you're going to stand out compared to the other people who are just focused on functionality. Fourth point, because you got to over deliver, remember to play, right? Technology should be fun, and like that's going to come across in your like portfolio. Go through your, like when you see a new technology, like have a play with it. It's different to focus, where you're focusing on like, okay, this is my job, this is where I'm going to focus my time. Just like, for example, like last autumn, I decided to have a play around with Tailwind. Like I didn't really need to know another front end coding language, but I was like in a position where I had a bit of time. COVID was in. So I played around with Tailwind, and now I use it everywhere. I use it in like every one of my projects, and like it's a massive time saver. So I think if a technology comes up that you think you're in a place where you're like, okay, this could actually save me time, playing around with those technologies as they come out can like put you massively ahead. So like Tailwind, for example, now is huge. Like if you're trying to get a job in as a front-end developer, pretty much every company is like interested in Tailwind. And by learning it early, like as it comes out, you have the most experience. It's only been out, you know, a year. By learning it straight away, you've got to be able to, you can put that on your CV. Hey, I've been doing this for the last 3 months. And that way you can like compete with people who have been in the industry, you know, 10, 20, 30 years. And that's it. follow me on Twitter. I'm Alex Hughes. And thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it. This has been my first talk. So yeah, thank you guys for coming.
That was awesome. That was like a lot of interesting points. I actually really liked everything that you said. I think a lot of, especially junior developers, when I really despise that word, but when you are looking for that first opportunity, I think what tends to happen is this industry, because it is very lucrative, and you do want, and usually, when you're graduating, you sort of have that debt to consider of as well, whether you've gone through the traditional route of a comp sci degree, or even, boot camps are not, they're not cheap. So you're thinking of like, okay, well, now I need to start earning some money, and whether it's paying back your parents or friends, or it's a loan, you start really looking at it in terms of, where can I make the most money? But I actually really like the fact that you said focus on the opportunity, not the money, because the money does come. The money, like if you look at, talk to any single or any senior developer out there, like you'll like it's very evident that yeah, they make a lot of money, but in order to get there, your talent will speak for itself, and that's really what I think in the beginning that you really need to focus on. And yeah, I got to say kudos to you for taking that train. I've been to London several times. That 2 hour trip from Birmingham and back is brutal. Um, how long did you do that for?
I did it for 2 years, and by the 2 years, I'd done enough. I'd done enough trains. I was like, you know what? I don't need to get on a train for a while.
2 years is a long time, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well with the opportunity, so I have friends who I went to uni with who are in tech, and they went to work for the first company like IBM or someone like that, like a huge name, and their initial salary was like quite high.
Mm,
They're on the same salary now, like 5-10K more, whereas without going into details, my salary is kind of like pretty much doubled every 3-4 years because I've like focused on the opportunity and like learning the new technologies. And then the next job, I'm like the only one with that experience in that specific new technology
mm.
with like, 3-4 years of experience. So it's not that you're like avoiding the money, it's that the money will come in time and it'll come like, it's not a linear growth. It's going to go like just jump and jump and jump.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And did you do a lot of jumping? Like speaking of like, coming from someone who doesn't have a traditional background and now being head of engineering, like how has that transition been? I know that, you talked about the earlier days, but how did you land head of engineering? Like, how many years did it take you to progress your career?
Yeah, I mean, so from it's been about 8 years overall, and then like the first 4 or 5 were freelance, and then the last 5 were like going from like a developer to like a senior like engineer to like to the head of engineering. And to be fair, to clarify, like Lupin's like a small company, like we're only like under 20 employees, so it's not like I'm like managing like a massive team. There's like loads of room to grow, but it's definitely a good starting point. I feel very lucky to have gotten to this point so quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you know what? I actually think that working for smaller companies sometimes gives you opportunities that you necessarily wouldn't have if you work for organizations that are larger in scale. Like I know that, we've hired ten developers from the community, and the amount of exposure that you get on a smaller team, like you're not, like you don't get stuck in a silo. Like you get exposed to the entire tech stack. Like you're doing everything. So the learning that happens, and we've seen that with like our own team members, where like 6 months like into their employment, we're like, whoa, they're ready to jump. Like they're intermediate, So I
Yeah,
think startups are actually a great budding ground for junior talent.
I think as well, like it's not on the slides, but one thing that I am is like quite product focused. Like I'm focused on what the startup needs rather than necessarily the technology. And I think that mindset is quite attractive to like a CEO who's like not necessarily technical, because then you're bringing two sides, right? You're bringing the technical know-how, but you're also in line with them. You're like, okay, yeah, but if we did this feature, it's going to make us like more money. And I think that's probably like the main advantage I've had. It's just been because of my background of not being technical, like use that to your advantage, speak that language.
I have a couple of more questions for you, but I want to go into the chat. There's a question from Victor. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Alex, you didn't say anything about algorithms and data structures. You think it's not worth spending time on them for getting the first job?
Right. So I'll be slated for this. I can see a guy I work with called Tim just shaking his head. Um, but I don't think like 90% of what tech requirements ask you to know, you need to know. Like they ask you to learn all these data structures, you know, like link trees and red binary, you know, like all of this crap. And then you get into the job and they're like, hey, can you just make that button go to the right? And you're like, what the fuck, man? Like, why was I doing all these algorithms? Like, what was all this like math for? You know, like I think you can have like a blissful job in tech for like 10 years and like never come across these things. You can have like a great job making good money and you don't need to worry about it
Yeah.
because very smart people have already solved all of these problems and you can just like pick a package, download it and
Yeah.
get it for free.
Yep, that's actually really funny you say that. And then I hate Alex. There was a podcast that Monarch was on recently. I think it was called HTML All Things. I might be butchering the name, but this conversation came up with algorithms and yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't understand why the industry is still so focused on doing algorithm tests when the truth is, especially when you know, most of the time those algorithm decisions are made by either an architect or senior talent. It's not made by someone who's, has 0 to 6 months or 1 year of experience. Like you're not making complex decisions like that. And usually when data structure decisions are made, your team is involved. It's not something, so why are we testing our developers based on that? I think this is a really a question for the industry, and I'm happy to see that more and more companies are stopping this practice. It certainly makes me happier because it's really kind of pointless. It's like, what are you going to be using that in real life? But I can talk more about that. I'm sure Monarch also has a lot to say about that as well. But I want to go back to the chat questions. Morgan wants to know, but can you get into the job without knowing algorithms?
I absolutely think you can. So like my first job, I got like literally the same thing. So they were asking me like specific questions. It's all about how you frame the question, right? So like if they come at you with like, hey, do you know these algorithms? You can be like, no, shit, sorry. No, but I do know this, like, and then show like a piece of work you've done. Like, no, I don't know algorithms, but like for this front end role that I'm like getting hired for, here's like a thing I've built in React. And so there's like loads of things like that. I think you've just got to be good at framing and reframing the question, and also not doing things you're not comfortable with. Like, there's a real it's getting better, but there's like a real prevalence for like whiteboard tests, and I'm terrible at whiteboard tests. And because it's just so unnatural. Like, you don't code on a whiteboard. My like code tells me when I'm wrong, and a whiteboard doesn't.
Yeah,
There's like lots of disadvantages to a whiteboard. How I like handle that is I say like, I'm not really comfortable doing whiteboard tests. I'm happy for you to set me any technical challenge. I'll take it home and I'll give you something tomorrow that like completes that challenge. So I think you just got to get better at reframing the question and play to your strengths, not play to your weaknesses.
yeah. I think that there's also this thing where when you're being interviewed, you are also interviewing the company. It's not just a one-way street. It's not just, they've asked you to do something and you're on the spot. You should be assessing them as much as they're assessing you. And honestly, especially for a tech shop, the tech test itself tells you a lot about the culture inside the company. So when you're being asked to do, for a lack of a better word, dumb things, that that says a lot about the company and like the type of culture it's going to be and the structure of it. So yeah, definitely assess the organization based on the questions you're being asked, the flow of the interviewers, and yeah, those are my 2 cents on that. Um, Going back to the chat,
Yeah.
um, so I'm butchering everyone's name. Dishesh. One day you'll have to face algos though. One day, as a hopefully as someone who is making decisions on the architect side of things. Tim, absolutely. I actually agree with Alex. And like he mentioned earlier with React.js, you only need to learn when you come across a problem that requires it. Any other questions? I just need to land an interview with a company who cares about culture and will take a chance on a new bootcamp grad. Yeah, I feel that. Um, Alex, I wanted to ask you a question on, founders. So, in the topic for your talk, you said why founders aren't hiring you, and I also talked about how startups are actually a really great budding ground for particularly new talent to really explore, even like not just like speed up learning, but also explore things that they're good at because you're given like everything, right? You're not just doing front end, you're doing back end, you're doing a bit of everything, and it's a great place to learn like what is it actually you enjoy in software development. So what are some of the things that a software developer can do, especially when they're looking for that first job, to connect with more founders?
Mm. I think there's two parts to that. So like to connect, I think you just need to like start building your platform. Like if you're going into your first junior job, you actually have like a real advantage that like I don't have, because you have like 100 days of code, and basically there's a whole industry of people at like the top of their fields who are kind of trying to make it their job to bring up the next generation. I don't know if you see this on like Twitter and things, but people almost trying to like curtail on like new people coming in. And you can use that to your advantage, like if you reach out to some people at like the top of their fields, just by being new, I think you actually have like a really strong chance of them, even just asking them questions by email, that sort of thing. I think you can actually make connections a lot easier than it is like for like, let's say me to do it. And then there's more of like, oh, what are you trying to sell me?
Mm,
Um, so I think there's that element to it. I think with founders, you've got to remember they have no time. Just in general, they have usually when you get those like algorithm questions, it's because they don't have the time to write a proper test, right? So they've just like bought something off the shelf, or they found some on, Medium, and they've just copy pasted it. So what you've got to do is just make the option really easy for them. So one thing I've done before is when I went into the meeting, I'd like built something for them, like in React, like a really simple app based around like a feature that I thought would be cool if they had.
mm,
It didn't work, obviously. It was just designs, effectively like a drawing that like done with HTML and CSS.
mm,
But I just like wowed them because you're coming in against people who are like, oh yeah, like I would like this job, but like for 20K more, or like they're coming in for like as a job. And if you come in as like passionate, you're like, forget the money. I'm just here to like learn and like um build features, and that's what I care about. You're just gonna massively stand out, and you get paid the same anyway, right? Like they only have the budget they've got. So I think it's a better approach for the same outcome.
yeah. So approach them as opposed to looking for, that's actually really interesting because there's this actually like on the hiring side, everyone pretty much knows this, that I don't know if I've frozen. Did you guys capture what I said there?
Yeah, we could hear you. It was just a video froze.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, like I was saying, there's this known thing on the hiring side that 80% of jobs are actually not posted. So you're like and this is true for us as well. Like we'll know when an opening comes available and we're looking for talent even before we hit the posting. So being proactive in looking at companies that are listed on Product Hunt, that are listed on Y Combinator or other places where startups are listed in your area, and reaching out to them or just like looking at their sites. And I think it's being more proactive on that side might allow you to connect with these founders a little bit faster.
Yeah, I actually saw something brilliant the other day, which was I don't know, you guys heard of Morning Brew, which was this it's like a newsletter for business, right? There was this random guy straight out of uni who basically emailed the CEO of Morning Brew and was like, hey, I'm going to make a Morning Brew newsletter tomorrow and I'm going to send it you. Like, if you like it, you know, give me a job. And that was like the whole email. And the guy just tweeted it. And he was like, what do you think? Should I give him a job? And then he did it. He just like, he made a newsletter, sent it over, which is like it's not a hard thing to do, right? But like everyone else is trying to apply with a CV and he's coming in with like the actual product. I think there's massive advantages you can take just by thinking outside the box and being passionate about the product rather than being like approaching it like a job.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just gonna drop some names here. I think believe Vanessa had a question. You can always try things like YouTube videos that walk you through some of the most common algorithm problems. I found that helpful at times. There's also things like Code Wars, Edit Leak Code. Yeah, they're all amazing. I'm also not the biggest fan of algos questions, but these resources have helped. Yeah, there's a balance, right? Like there's a balance of going to these platforms like Code Wars, Leak Code, like, and then we have, our learnathons at Mintbean that are focused more on portfolio building. And Alex also sort of mentioned making beautiful things. And that's another thing that, when hiring managers are looking at your portfolio, sometimes they are judging you on the design, even though you guys are developers. So there is that bias that does happen when they interact with your portfolio. If it looks better, then there seems to be this perception that the code works better. I'm not sure why that exists, or maybe they haven't had the memo.
Yeah, that I'd 100% agree with that. I think part of it is that it's not always the tech person making the final say. There's usually somebody else. And if you show the same product, right, like the same demo, and one of them's pretty and one of them's not, they're going to choose the pretty one and be like, but does it do the same thing? And you're like, yeah, but it's the same. And then it doesn't really work that way. So yeah, definitely, I think even just spending 10% of your time making things pretty, it has like a massive effect on like the overall, effect of your product.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I'm like, I could probably go on asking you more questions. This is definitely an interesting talk. I'm sort of questioned out a little bit over here. If anyone else has any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or maybe open up your mic for a couple of more minutes. And Alex, would you be okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Alex, what's a hot new technology that you'd like to recommend?
Hot new technology. Well, Tim, I don't know, I stand by it, right? React's like not a new technology, but I think just learning React and like Tailwind will get you so far. That's like 90% of a job right there. If you just learn those two things really well. And the amount of stuff you can do with that just by like having a front end technology, you could build Netflix, right? You could build what Netflix looks like. It doesn't need to work again, because you can learn the API a bit later. But you could build Netflix, and then at your next interview, you just pull up Netflix, right? And you're just like, yeah, I built this. I just think there's like loads of scope for things you can build, and just yeah, less new technologies and more just really focus and build lots of things and just get better and build those like muscle memory.
Hey, Alex. I have kind of like a silly question. Is it really important to have a Twitter account? I don't really have that social media, and if I were to start one now, like what could I really, is it really important for a new software dev to have a Twitter?
Like the answer should be no, that it's not important. It's not related to your job, right? Like, why do you need a platform? But the real answer is that like every person that's employed me has looked at my Twitter and like has been impressed I have followers. And it's literally just a leftover for when I worked in marketing. Because one of the products was like a Twitter marketing tool. So I did it on myself first. But yeah, like literally,
Tweet.
sorry.
What kind of things would you tweet to gain
I
fame?
would tweet. So I've seen this a lot, right? And I think it's a little played out, but I think it's how you approach it, right? If you're doing it for content's sake, to try and like sell a course on something, like people are gonna smell that like straight away. If you're just on Twitter telling your real opinions and saying like, hey, I built this thing today. Like so for example, yesterday, I just like live tweeted whilst I did that presentation. Like I built that with Next and Tailwind. I just like live tweeted. I do stuff like that. Like there's nothing in that for me. Like I'm not gonna sell it. Like I'm not selling a course on, how to make the monies from code. I think people appreciate that. You're giving like your interesting take.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a really good question, Annie. And I think like especially when you're trying to connect with that land that first job, it seems like everyone is on socials. And I can tell you from someone who hires developers and is at the top of the funnel, like I hand. So if we have like 1,000 resumes, like I'm the one who will skim through those 1,000 resumes and then hand like 10 out of those thousands to our technical team and be like, hey, I think that these 10 need to be looked at. And in order to slim that 1,000 to a 10, like, yeah, you better believe that the person who is reviewing those applications needs to look at every tool present, whether it's Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn. But like it that sort of goes into advocating for yourself. I think it depends on where you are in your journey as well. Like if you are someone who's more seasoned, you can take definitely a more laid back approach to it, talk about things that you're interested in. But if you are actively looking for work, then it's like, hey, like employers are going to be looking at this profile. What do I want to put out there? What do I want them to see? Like what kind of work am I really interested in talking about? So yeah, it's a tricky one. I think it would require its own workshop. What to what to tweet about.
Yeah, absolutely. It is an interesting one. It shouldn't matter, but I think it does in like a way where like a subconscious way. I don't think people realize that it matters, but if you're like a new startup and they're like the tech team's like 3 people, and then you're like the one with like not even a lot of followers, like 5,000 followers, something like that. They kind of have it in the back of their mind, like, oh, well, they can like talk about us, and that's like 5,000 people that we didn't have yesterday. And there's kind of this like, just by being focused on the product and having your own platform, I think is like really useful.
Yep. Yep. Awesome. I think there's a couple of more questions that have come up. Terry, what about building your own website? I feel like that's a good project way to market yourself too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just a good way to try new technologies as well. Like I try and like build something on my website like every few months, just redesign it, just to play with skills. I think that's a really good thing. And just keep scope of projects small, right? Like if you want to build a website, it can literally just be your name with a picture. Like it doesn't need to be this like, I need to build a blog and then I need to build an about me and like a timeline. And then it ends up being a thing you never do. I think starting small and keeping it small is like really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Not much work experience. So Abel is asking, if you didn't have much work experience when applying, how would you overcome that when applying for entry level positions? How do you stand out more to get interviews?
Yeah, like I can, from experience, like what people do is they look at your GitHub. It doesn't need to be real. Like you're competing against people who may have coded more than you, but all of their code is private, right? Like because it's like proprietary, so they can't show it either. So you're in the exact same boat. Like nobody, like the stuff I'm working on at Lupin, if I tried to get a new job, I wouldn't be able to show that code to like any interviews, right? I'd just be able to show what the website looks like. So I do what I would do is I'd build portfolio items, like pick a scope of a project. Like your website's a good example. You could build a website, or it could be, like you could try and build Netflix, like just the layout, things like that. And just over time, you're going to accumulate it. Like if you do like a project a month, like a really small scoped project, like, a night of coding, I think you can get to a portfolio pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would even argue that posting, sometimes like we've seen this in the community, is like where a blocker can be updating your portfolio site. So using some sort of like out of the box solutions, like Wix, Square, and really working on the portfolio pieces. But if you want to do the portfolio site, that's fine too, but don't let that hinder you from updating the portfolio site. Because sometimes, like if you've made it a very complex application, that's what I've seen from interacting with so many developers, is it doesn't get updated as often. So you're building, but you're not updating your portfolio. I think that's one thing.
Yeah, totally. Like, yeah, I meant like literally just like your portfolio being GitHub, like just keep putting new projects on there of things you've done. I think you could get really far with that. And they're just going to see that like, yeah, they don't have something they can show me, but they have all of these like random bits that like all look pretty cool. And then you can just talk about those in your interview.
Absolutely. Awesome. Great. Thank you, Alex. I think we're done with questions from what I see, and I think we had only allocated half an hour. So thank you so much for staying on a little bit longer for us. Really appreciate it, guys. Please connect with Alex on Twitter, and if there's any other questions you guys have, drop them in our server, of course. And I'm really looking forward to everything else that we're doing in Mintbean. If you guys haven't heard about the Dev Collective yet, it's a new initiative that we launched. I'm super, super, super excited about it. We're trying to make it more easier for developers to land their first jobs. And there's a lot of scholarships that are going to be open soon, and they're going to be based on merit and a need basis as well. So if you've been looking for work for more than a year, then you definitely are eligible for that scholarship. So send anybody who's an organizer a message on our server and say, hey, I've been looking for work for more than a year. Would I be eligible for the scholarship? And we'll set you up with an interview. Awesome.
Yeah, sounds awesome. Thank you for your time, guys. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for sticking for my plug. Appreciate it. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye.